He says in 16 years, Facebook has acquired 90 companies. In 33 years, Apple has acquired 125 companies. In just 23 years, Amazon has acquired 113 companies. Most shocking of all, perhaps, Google, in only 2 decades, has acquired a whopping 258 companies. Congressman Buck says this is part of a plan to eliminate competition and therefore to increase revenue from the big tech companies. And as these tech giants monopolize and the lines between the private and public sectors begin to blur, many conservatives are abandoning their more recent libertarian-esque stance on antitrust laws and are refinding their roots in trust-busting GOP President Teddy Roosevelt as a guide. And the issue isn't completely partisan either. It may be rare to see our leaders work across party lines to reach a common goal, but that's currently happening in the lower chamber to some degree, as Republican Representatives Ken Buck, Madison Cawthorn, and Lance Gooden co-sponsor not one, but 5 Democrat-led bills aiming to fortify our nation's antitrust laws and to disrupt the concentration of power currently maintained by tech monopolists in Silicon Valley. Joining us now to discuss all this and more is Josh Hammer. He's the counsel and policy advisor for the Internet Accountability Project. Thanks for being here tonight, Josh.
Kara, thanks for having me.
Gracie, you recently wrote about the bipartisan backlash about big tech. Why are we seeing this pushback in the first place?
Kara, from my perspective, and this is kind of the theme of Josh Hawley's recent book about the tyranny of big tech. From my perspective, sitting here in the year 2021, I'm not a historian by training, but I've done a lot of reading of American history. It is not obvious to me that there has been a time in American history that rivals the present moment along the lines of the following. We have certain companies that not only are the largest market cap companies on the entire stock exchange, literally at this moment, Kara, as I speak to you, the 5 highest market cap, the most valuable companies in the United States are Google, Alphabet, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft. Those are literally the 5 biggest. But not only do they have just incredible economic power, and they really do have incredible economic power, they control the means to the 21st century public square. They have fundamentally transformed the way that Americans engage with one another as far as information gatekeeping, as far as access to information. Think about not even just information. Think about starting a small business. There is no better way to start a small business these days than to aggressively advertise on Google and Facebook. But these companies control that too. Amazon, which is perhaps a little less discussed than the others, but is arguably even more problematic, they are flagrantly violating the antitrust laws all the time. They are literally Amazon is taking the data from the third-party sellers that it lists on the marketplace, then manipulating that data to then kind of get into your Amazon feed its own Amazon Basics products on. This is straightforward Sherman Act, Klain Act, antitrust violation stuff. So the broader picture of what's going on here is that I think conservatives are looking at the playing field. They're looking at these select few handful of companies that are wielding more power on a brute economic level and also just a kind of just informational access to the public square level, more so than we've seen at least since the great railroad robber barons of the 1880s, 1890s, arguably, like I said, in the entire history of the republic. And they are waking up and saying, well, you know what? We actually have laws on the books to deal with this. And back, as you kind of said, Kara, at the beginning, back upon a time, Republicans understood this intuitively. The Sherman Antitrust Act, which is the original antitrust act signed into law in 1890, was the work of Congressman Senator John Sherman of Ohio. He was a staunch pro-Lincoln, anti-slavery Republican. Teddy Roosevelt, of course, known as the trust-busting president. Josh Hawley wrote a biography of President Roosevelt. I think it was 10, 12 years ago or so. Also a Republican. So this is in our history. And the difference here is that antitrust is best thought of not as regulation. It's not kind of a slipshod sledgehammer to kind of take off every business under it. Rather, antitrust is better understood as a scalpel. It is law enforcement. The Department of Justice has an antitrust division. This is just law enforcement. So what has been happening for decades is that these largest companies, in particular the Silicon Valley technologists, the monopolists, we have antitrust amnesty. The same way that we have immigration amnesty, this is antitrust amnesty. It is time to enforce the laws on the books.
We see a lot of partisan rhetoric right now dividing, the right from the left. But on this one issue, we do see there are a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans who have their own issues against big tech. But of course, they have their own issues with big tech for very different reasons. Do you think the gulf is too big between the two to cross? Or do you think we can use both the Republican and the Democrat anger against big tech to actually reach a real agreement to actually get some action done on this?
So I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I'm increasingly thinking that the latter is possible and arguably likely. Now, there's a lot of different ways to kind of come after big tech. Okay, you have Section 230, you have antitrust, you have common carrier regulation, similar to what Justice Thomas floated in that wonderful concurrence that he wrote in early April, I believe it was. So there's a number of ways to come after this. Section 230, which was kind of the avenue that is still being discussed, to be clear, but I think that was kind of the first kind of it was kind of the first talking point that kind of some of the big tech critics a few years ago started getting out there. I was always more cynical about the chances of a major 230 reform passing because on that issue in particular, just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page here, Section 230, of course, is the provision in the 1996 Communications Decency Act, which basically allows these platforms to make publisher-esque editing decisions, content moderation decisions, without being legally treated as being liable as a publisher for the common law of defamation. I was always more skeptical that we would get major movement on 230 because on that particular issue, you do see a huge gulf between the parties. Most Republicans basically, view kind of platform access as a kind of a modern civil right. They don't want you to discriminate, no shadow banning, anything like that. Democrats are coming from the complete opposite perspective. It's the whole Russian disinformation, like all that nonsense on Facebook. So on that issue, I was always a little more skeptical. On antitrust, that actually might be a sweet spot, honestly. And, I think we see that, honestly, because President Biden's recent nominee to head up the Federal Trade Commission, a 32-year-old, very young, center-left progressive darling by the name of Lina Khan, she got, I think it was 71 or 72 votes to get closer on the Senate floor and 69 votes for her confirmation, including 21 Senate Republicans. That's almost half the Republican caucus. Only a few years ago, Lina Khan would have been thought of as a quote-unquote far-left figure. But I think a lot of Republicans are understanding that, their old kind of thoughts on antitrust doctrine might have been a little misguided. And you know what? There's no harm, Kara. Here's the key point here. There is no harm whatsoever in having the humility to say the facts on the grounds have changed. Therefore, I will be willing to reassess how I view the relevant application of the law here.
You've probably heard the American Principles Project. They sent out a letter recently, and I had some of them on my show, some of the great guys from that foundation, about their letter that they sent out to different Republican lawmakers and to their staffers and others, saying that be wary of big tech money. It's coming in, and basically it's to help sway and to influence the debate, as many Republicans, as you're talking about, now are starting to take this more antitrust stance that just a few years ago was more libertarian-esque. Now we're not seeing that so much anymore. We've seen Congressman Ken Buck. He's one of those leaders who's skewed all those big tech money, Google and elsewise. Do you think more Republicans should take the same pledge as Ken Buck when it comes to getting rid and not accepting big tech money anymore?
Absolutely. No, look, I live currently in Denver, Colorado. Ken Buck's district is not far from me. He has really emerged as a great spokesman for the right on this issue. I mean, he is hammering away at this, and I personally could not be more supportive. I mean, that's not to say that every single bill is obviously perfectly drafted. I mean, many conservatives will always find like specific phrases and words or whatever in bills. That's kind of the nature of the beast on Capitol Hill. That's kind of the point of forging compromise and building bipartisan legislation. But on this issue that you're raising here as to whether Republicans should forswear donations from these major actors, of course they should. I mean, of course Jim Jordan and every other major House and Senate Republican should forswear donations from these companies that are actively silencing, censoring, and deplatforming and shadow banning their own constituents. This is common sense stuff right here. I mean, the same way that a generic House or Senate Republican should not take a penny in donations from George Soros. So similarly, should they not take a penny in donations from woke Silicon Valley technologists like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and so forth, who are literally increasingly obvious. They are out to get us. They want us out of the public square. And you know what? They control the public square, which is quite harrowing, but it's also a reality that we need to confront. One way to stop them from doing so is to stop taking their money.
Josh, well said. Thanks so much for dropping by tonight.